recording. Thomas, can you confirm that this is recording from your end? Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to cruise through this as quickly as I can. There's a lot in here. I took a ton out, and I'll probably do a follow-up as well. And then hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for Q&A. Basically, this is just a quick rundown of theory of change and what it means for us. It's very high level. So essentially, theory of change, and this, you'll get a slightly different definition depending on who you talk to, but in the nonprofit space, typically, theory of change is defined really as a rationale for how systemic change happens based on the particular contexts of a given organization. And there's three sort of core pieces that I want to break down within this definition. And the first is that this is really our rationale. This is a point of view that the organization takes around how change happens and how the organization makes change. The sort of second big call out here is that this is about the change itself. It's a cause and effect statement or position. And so it's really focused on the how. And then the contexts also come into play and are particularly significant. So, this is the reality of the organization, our constraints, our resources, our values, our mission, as well as external contexts like what's happening in Oakland, the stakeholders, relationships and dynamics that exist, institutional systems and processes, et cetera. Theory of change is really useful for nonprofit organizations because it directly connects what you do with how you do it and why you do it and what outcomes you want to see. It's good for making decisions. So really identifying which levers to pull to make change, as well as prioritizing resources, which is particularly relevant for us because we really are an all volunteer brigade. So we don't have a ton of time and money to throw around, and we want to make sure we're being effective with that. It's good at making connections. This kind of goes directly to the presentation on partnerships that Sean shared with us a few weeks back. Really making sure that we're attracting the folks that we want to align with internally, that we want as part of our community, as well as helping to align with partners and understand who to work with. And then, of course, it's good for making change itself. It's really about making sure that we're being effective and that we're actually achieving the impact that we are intending to. How this actually plays out, how you actually get to a theory of change, it really starts at the top. It starts by identifying that desired outcome and really identifying what vision we're working toward. From there, we need to identify what has to change in order for that outcome to happen, right? So if we want to see a thriving and equitable Oakland, what needs to change for that to be true? And then, of course, as I mentioned, contexts come into play. So we need to identify the values, the assumptions that we're bringing to the table, the points of view, as well as the contextual realities we're working in within the problem space, so to speak, or within the city for us. And then, of course, that then leads to our methodology, the activities that we actually do to accomplish this stuff within these contexts. So when it comes to Open Oakland and how this applies to us, I think a little bit of background is important because we tend to lose institutional memory just with turnover and history. But we were founded in 2012, and I've cobbled this history together from lots of historical documents in the shared Google Drive, as well as some oral history from various longstanding members, some of whom are here tonight. Started with two co-captains. Two dudes decided they were going to start a brigade. It really sprung out of a specific civic hacking event and was very much focused on good government and efficient government. And so government partnership was very much at the center of that mission and activities. It grew pretty rapidly. There was a very tech-centric membership. And ultimately, there was a fair amount of discussion around inclusion and decision-making and how decisions were being made within the brigade. At the end of this deck, which I will share in Slack, there is a resource list where there are links to historical documents if folks want more context. In 2016, our original co-captain stepped down. New roles were created and the bylaws that we now use were written. I know that John Baldo had a significant hand in some of that work. And so we owe that to him and other members to really sort of, and Ronald as well was involved in that process. I think Mike, you were there at the time. And so these are really the bylaws and roles that we've been working with for the past several years. Last year, our leadership team, which is, I think at this stage now was like our third cycle of leadership, if I'm correct, if my math is right, held a workshop with a bunch of members and really did a mission refresh, which is, and came up with what we are using now, and really brought in more of a social justice lens. And actually, you know, if we look at the language used now, the city, the sort of good government, effective government is a little bit less emphasized. Of course, over the last year or two, we've actually had a lot of conversation around inclusion and making sure that members' voices are being heard and that Open Oakland is really representative of our larger city community. And that's where we are now and what we're trying to focus on and sort of refine and I think sort of really evaluate what our impact is. So as we've already talked about, this is our mission. You can see that when it comes to theory of change, it's sort of embedded in here already. You know, if we look at the outcome vision we're hoping to achieve, that's a thriving and equitable Oakland. And how we're doing that, the changes we want to see is the bridge between technology and community. It's a little broad, and I think there's definitely some refining we can do, but it definitely is a genuine theory of change. And then the how we do this, our activities, our methods are really focused on cultivating relationships by partnering with city and community, inspiring civic engagement through tools and education, tools and events that educate the city on how government works and hopefully inspires change, and then empowering Oaklanders to advocate for collective well-being. And this, I think, we're going to need to have some further discussions around some of this language, or I would like to see further discussions around this language, because if we really think about some of the phrases we're using and the assumptions that are embedded in this material, for example, collective well-being may not be the same for everybody, right? Depending on what kind of community, sub-community you're in within Oakland. If you're a member of a historically marginalized community, your definition of well-being may be very different than somebody who is in a more privileged community. And so being able to articulate those differences and acknowledge them and understand them and make sure that we're sort of intentionally thinking about those things as we apply this stuff, I think is really important. And so if we map Open Oakland's approach to the sort of overall framework, we can see it works out pretty clearly. There are, however, a whole lot of unanswered questions embedded within that mission and methodology. So the big one is, what do we mean by a thriving and equitable Oakland? The city defines equity, as we heard from Darlene a couple months ago, as race, gender, disability, and other personal identifiers no longer being an indicator of well-being outcomes. Right now in Oakland, race is an indicator of well-being across every metric the city measures. So perhaps that might find its way into our definition of what a thriving and equitable Oakland looks like. Maybe it means that those who are most impacted by the city's policies, budgets, and activities actually have a say in those things. It could mean any number of these things. And the more specifically we define what that vision or outcome is that we want to see, you can see how it can influence and impact the decisions we make about what projects we work on, what partnerships we take on, and what else, where we focus our resources and energy. And it becomes really useful because we could go in a lot of different directions, and we have traditionally gone in a lot of different directions, and some more intentionally than others. when it comes to bridging technology and community and what does the change actually look like what is the change that needs to happen, we've got some assumptions embedded in here that bridging technology and community is actually going to lead to equity in Oakland. And that may be an untested theory, is that this may be something we want to talk about and really sort of put through its paces and stress test. So maybe this actually means that increased tech literacy enables better decision-making about how to use and apply technology in government settings. Well, if that's our belief, that's going to engender a very specific set of activities than something like teaching technologists to apply an equity and power sharing lens to their work that helps mitigate harmful consequences and inequities. So these are two beliefs in terms of how bridging technology and community might lead to equity in Oakland, but they also imply very different activities. And so being mindful and intentional about how we are defining this stuff and being specific about it allows us then to direct our energy. So that is a very high level run through of just theory of change in general and how we might think about it as it applies to us. I have a few next steps that I'm proposing that I would love to invite folks into conversation about. So for example, I think, as I said, we need to define what we mean by thriving and equitable. This means different things to different people. And so being aligned as a community, as a group, will help us focus. I think we may want to articulate specifically how bridging technology and community drives that equity. I also think that exploring how technology can help and potentially harm different communities in Oakland is very important. If we are going to make the claim that technology is our tool for change, we need to make sure we're wielding that responsibly. I also think it behooves us to better understand our government's role in the disparities we see and how we might influence change. So that might be both how government systems and institutional processes reinforce inequity, but it also might mean what role can government play in dismantling oppression, systemic oppression. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, I think we need to map OpenOakland's resources to understand how our strengths can and should be put to use. We have a lot of incredible knowledge and expertise and skill among our membership. I mean, everybody here tonight brings to the table like a huge variety of resources and value, and we don't leverage that, I think, nearly as well as we could. And so I think one of the starting points there is to really document it and to collect that information and extract all of that. Like, what do we know as a group? What skills do we have as a group? Let's put it down on paper, let's organize it, and let's look at how we can distribute that effectively. That's my lightning talk. It is 7:10. I would love to keep us on until 7:15 for questions, just to do a little Q&A. But I also have this little survey. It's brief. It's about 8 questions at the most. So I would love to get people's input on what you think of our current theory of change, how you think it might be adjusted, adapted, and then also just an invitation for more conversation. So there's a question on there if you're interested in participating in a workshop or two where we actually workshop some of this stuff. I think that would be super helpful. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Thomas or Andrew, if you can man the chat box, I cannot see it, so I'm going to rely on y'all. Any thoughts or questions? Is there anything that strikes you as either interesting or surprising or problematic?
We've got a question from Angela in the chat. Curious to hear about organizations that have used this concept of theory of change to make systemic changes. Do you have any examples of organizations that have done this kind of work?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's a very common framework in the nonprofit sector. And actually, I will drop the link in Slack in the general channel to this document. There's a list of resources, including a couple of examples of specific organizations, as well as links to additional places where you can find additional resources. Harlem Children's Zone is a big one. They're very fairly well-known educational organization in New York that has done a lot of work around this. I've just dropped the deck into Slack for folks who are interested. But yeah, I would recommend going to the deck and poking around those links at the end. I'd be curious to hear if folks were, or how familiar folks were, or felt like they really knew what our sort of theory of change was going into this, or if it felt like a little bit of a black box, black hole.
Jess, this is Sean. I wanted to say, not only am I giving you the gold star, but this is like an excellent review because I'm so familiar of it being in the activist space. And so this is kind of like a way to say, like, eyes on the prize, everyone. Like, it seems like we're doing our itty bitty like inches, or like we're adding drops to the bucket, but we're actually moving really forward. So great job distilling this really complicated concept. And, I'm curious to see what other people feel like they can put the drops into this bucket.
Hey, Jess, this is Michael. And I second Sean. Well done. And I really appreciate the way that you distilled the mission into the theory of change. I think that's really powerful, where you could actually see the formula at work in the mission. And I didn't see that before, and you really brought it together for me. So thank you.
Well, I'm excited to hear that. I will not take credit for that because I was not part of the workshop that actually this came out of. But I know that there were a lot of folks here tonight who were there and did a really good job with this. And I think for us now, the incentive, or sort of, I don't know, for me, it's something of an obligation really, is to refine this and carry it forward and get a bit more specific given our current context and the conversations we've been having as a brigade over the past months and year. And really, I think being more deliberate and intentional about connecting the dots between our week by week project work and that grander vision of what it is we're trying to accomplish with that work.
Great. Sign me up for the workshop.
Awesome. I will. What do other folks, I'd be interested to hear from some of the old timers, as some additional folks who've been here for a while. I'm curious what your thoughts are around how this mission has evolved over the years. I mean, 8 years is quite a long time. We're one of the older Code for America brigades, I think. And so I'd love to hear from somebody who was involved earlier on.
Is that my cue? Or is it, or Felicia? Sorry.
I was just going to say something very brief. I've been around for going on 4 years, I guess, but there was a year that I wasn't here. So, but anyway, I feel as though we're maybe drifting away from a partnership with the city to some extent, which makes me sad. But I'm not. For example, there used to be a certain city employee who was very frequently at our hack nights, and there just hasn't been, like, is there anybody from the city here tonight? I don't, at least I don't think so. Maybe there is, but Yeah, I just thought I'd bring that up. Like that seems to be a trend and I don't know what to do about it.
So there is, Michael is here. And I think,
Oh, okay, great.
I think that I think what you are bringing up is, and I sort of tried to get at this a little bit, but I think you're right. I think that we have shifted focus a bit away from city partnerships or city sort of efficient government, that sense of working as sort of a support system for the city. And I think we have some questions and to ask ourselves around how, you know, if we are going to be, you know, living our values of uplifting traditionally marginalized and underrepresented groups in Oakland, how do we do that in a way that also enables us to build and maintain good relationships with the city when sometimes those are in opposition of each other, right? I mean, there are city,
I mean, they shouldn't, but yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? The city, there, I think, are a lot of trust issues among some, or, you know, I mean, I think that OPD and Black Oaklanders have a long history of friction, for example. I think that, you know, housing is another area where there's been a long history of very, like, historically deliberate, frankly, oppression. And I think we have to acknowledge that if we're going to figure out how to create those bridges, right? Like, we've got to figure out what those bridges look like.
Right. And I'm just curious as to whether, did we pivot away, or did they push us away? Like, I'm genuinely curious. Like, I don't really understand how it went down.
Yeah, you know, so that is, and I feel like there's a longer answer to that, but the one thing I will share is that the theory of change that you put together, Jess, is great. We've actually needed this kind of information documented. What I will share is that actually I was part of Open Oakland during its ideation phase, which is 2011, with primarily Spike, and then with Eddie and Spike, the two co-founders. One of the things that I'd love to do is, and this is definitely going to be a separate time, is flesh out that history just a little bit more, because that will definitely inform where we've been, what types of data, or what types of historical richness basically is left off of that timeline, and then what we could go ahead and add in so that we don't actually repeat those mistakes, or in some cases, we could actually just spotlight and elevate them, especially with regard to accessing different parts of Oakland that are actually not present in the room.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful call out. And I two things to say to that. One, let's do an oral history, like maybe we can do a series of oral history lightning talks over the next, you know, couple months, and where folks can really share out their experiences over the years. I think that would be phenomenal. I think everybody, at least a lot of people, would find value in that. I will also encourage everyone to fill out this survey. It's short. It's really just to capture your sort of what ideas are swirling around, and really allow me to sort of follow up and kind of shape what our next steps might look like. And so this is a much larger, longer conversation that obviously we won't wrap up and tie up neatly in a bow tonight. So I do want to encourage you to fill out the survey, and also feel free to just start discussion in the general channel. I think it sounds to me like that a lot of folks here are really interested in this and feel like it's worth continuing. So does anybody else have any pressing questions or comments that they want to share before we move into project work?
I just wanted to address the question about, who, did we get a divorce from the city or who left who? I think, Mei Ling, who was the chief digital engagement officer, I think that was her title in Oakland, left. I don't know that anyone has filled that position. So that was our main cheerleader and person who hooked us up with folks. We still have connections with the city. I mean, there are the Open Disclosure Project has a city member who attends regularly. I don't think she's here tonight, but and there are other projects that interact with the city, and some of those projects are people reached out to the city. Some of those projects, folks in the city came to us. I think without Mei Ling, we probably need to do more advertising within the city. Open Oakland is known. I talk with folks in the city who, I work with Open Oakland and sort of things we do, but I don't think there's any disaffection either way. It's just, people are busy and there's no projects that have come from the city and they don't people here haven't thought of things that would be good to work on. So that's my view of what's happening with us in the city.
Thank you, Mike, for that. I will say that the resource mapping exercise, I think, is going to be really valuable for us because that'll allow us to start to identify some of those relationships, both existing and past. I think that's a huge part. The relationships, as Sean talked about, weeks ago now, are a huge asset for us. And so being caring for those in intentional ways and nurturing those relationships are really important, but they do take work, and they take a lot of work, particularly at the city level when you're talking about government bureaucracy and then volunteer time, people who are really just sort of contributing their labor on the side. So yeah, I'm really excited that you all are excited. That makes me happy. And I think what I'll do is suggest we move this into Slack, the general channel, as well as the survey. And what I will do is follow up with folks who do complete the survey, and I will share out in general. We'll probably include it in future emails as well. So if you are not getting emails from Open Oakland, either sign up in the footer at our website or hit me up and I'll just add you to the list and make sure you're on there. With that, let's hack. I will say for folks who want to break off